All right, so before I get into how to do the code along work this week, because we're going to continue using color codes video, the one for Fetch API. But before I get into that, I want to give a shout out to one of your fellow students here, Matthew, who pointed out to me, and I'm going to take over to my VS Code, that when I was doing the modules, I did all that wonderful work to break those into different JS files. And then I forgot the step, and I don't know what happened, but I'm glad he pointed it out. Is that the whole point of doing, right, these imports into the main JS is that you don't have to actually then script, which is what you're trying to avoid, those files. Oh, sorry. Yeah, actually, I already fixed it there. I was on the other one. I had to go pull an older one. Is that the idea is that you don't have to do these anymore. Okay. You still have to do the main because the main is the one that you're importing other things into. But the idea is that you get rid of this stuff. So, go fix that because we had it in, depending on which item you're in, but I'm guessing you're going in sequence. So you'll have it in 24 and at this point in 26. Oh, yeah, in 28 as well. So you can fix that and just you can verify that that works by getting rid of it, which is the idea. So thanks, Matthew, for pointing that out. And I love to have other sets of eyes on code because that's just a great way to learn. You know, we are all human, we make mistakes. Okay, so now we're going to continue our discussion of async. And in this case, we're going to cover an API that's built into the browser that we've already been introduced. We've already been using the Fetch API. We did that in week 15, but now we're going to take and expand our knowledge about, the other things. Well, first, how does it kind of work under the hood a little bit? And then learn some things about API keys, which I'll talk about next. And this really important, the header object that you can pass into the fetch as well. So these are really important concepts for anytime you want to make API calls and use this built-in feature of the browser, which is such a wonderful, wonderful upgrade. So the thing I want to say is that he'll start and you'll start coding at 420, and by the way, the folder this time is 034 fetch API. And then you'll start at 420, and then at 8:15 introduction to the Fetch API. And I've given you the URL for California if you want to use that one as well. And then he switches over because he starts talking about the whole idea of the API key. Because he does a pretty good discussion here about that many of these people who are providing the APIs want to be able to keep track of it. So on this one, you're not required to get the API key at all. You can still code along. And that really kind of made me take a moment to think about something and that I have been assuming. So here's and I'm stopping here. I'm doing a little sidetrack here. So in this folder, create a README file and answer the following question. And I kind of know the answer for most of you. Like when you're coding along with me, I'm going to ultimately run the code, but do you always run the code to see if it works, right? And the answer is you, and I hate to say should, but you really need to be. And so first answer that question, not about this item, but in general, when you're coding along with me, do you go into the live server in the browser, see if your code's working? That's the way you learn. Because somebody asked me today on Discord, and I appreciated this question about my code. And I haven't really shared my URL, but back in week 10, I said you could start with my code. But the idea, and I almost hesitate publishing mine because it's too easy just to copy it, right? And that's not the way you learn. The way you learn is actually to write code and then to troubleshoot where you have issues with the code. Anyway, give me some, right? Kind of tell me an insight into your process here. because as we move, especially into the next item where we're going to start talking about chat GDP is going to be the next item in this week. We have to really start thinking about how are we learning, right? Because it's such an important topic. Anyway, so the reason I bring it up here is that when he starts right after this 840, and he's going to show you another example, in this case, the news API and the idea of the API key. You're not required to go get that API, which means, or sorry, you're not required to go get that API key, which by the way is free. And I actually did sign up for it because I wanted my code to work to make sure it did. And it was fun to see that work. And I can see using that. So I did sign up for it just to make sure my code worked. But you're not required to, right? But go ahead and code along, even though, and that's kind of what led me to the discussion about, I wanted you to reply in the API, in the README file about, right, you checking that the code works, because at this point with this commit, you're not going to have working code. But you go ahead and code along until 1058, and then you commit with API keys, because that's another important one. Now, when he gets to this point, after the 11 minute point, then he's going to talk about the request headers. Really just, this is why I'm so glad to have this content covered, but he's going to use the API from Spotify. Now, I went and checked out the Spotify from the Spotify's API. And it is generally free, but in this case, you actually have to go through quite a process to get the API key. You can't just sign up and they give you the key, because if it was, I would have actually had you do this, because this is a lot more content, because you're going to code all the way through until 26, 27. Let me fix that. It's colon. All right. And then you'll commit with fetch header object. Now, in this case, again, because you don't have the API key, and that's what I'm referring to here, it's not a straightforward process. I found by doing some research that and this is good for you to see as well, right? So think about this. Spotify is actually making a developer kind of do a bit more work before they'll give you an API key, where somebody like the news API, long as you sign up and they can track you, because what happens is, this is fairly common practice with API keys, is like they limit you to the number of times you can call that API. So that's fairly common, okay? So then what you'll do again is you'll go all the way to 26, 27, commit your code with this, and then watch to the end. Now, I would tell you, if it was me, I'd actually take some notes in this README file, but I'm not going to require that. But I'm just going to explain to you at this point, when he starts talking about XHR. I used to, in my previous classes, cover XHR, but I'm kind of glad we're starting to see it fade out, because fetch is so much cleaner. But I still want you to see, and he'll discuss the syntax of it, and I think that's good. And then talks about why fetch, right? And then of course, around 30 minutes when he starts doing his PR, which is, by the way, also good. I do think we have to support content creators. And in this case, it's such good content. I do subscribe to his channel as well. Okay, so actually that's all we're going to have for this first item, is you doing the code along, answering my question. Actually, since it is the old thing, I think I'm going to change my mind. I do want you to, in your file here, put some notes about because after you commit at 1026, then there'll just be concepts. So I do want you to put in some concepts, and we'll name those, and you'll see it in the file, right? The history of fetch, and it's XHR, and then why fetch. So put some notes in there from watching those two. I think I apologize for changing my mind midway through, but after I thought about it, because this is all we'll have for this item, and then in the next one we're gonna actually play around a little more with actually getting some experience with an actual API and this idea of headers. Okay, so once you do that, again, you'll see the additional content here, and then you can commit this one So you'll have the commit for intro, you'll have the commit for the APIs, you'll have the commit for fetch, and then I'll give you one more for the notes. All right, talk to you on the next one.